Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today I'll be teaching a practical class. It's about your long case only. All of you know that the long case is going to be cataract. Cataract in various combinations like cataract with pseudophakia, cataract with aphakia, or both eyes cataract, or both eyes pseudophakia for that matter. So today, what I'll be telling you is mainly about the commonest, uh, most commonly followed cataract surgery procedure, that is small incision cataract surgery in detail, along with another very commonly done cataract surgical procedure, that is phacoemulsification. So, what I will be concentrating today is on the commonly asked questions regarding these surgical procedures during your practicals viva. Okay, during the long case viva, what are the commonly asked questions that I will be stressing today? So, we will start with pre op investigations that are done for cataract surgery. This is a very, very, very commonly asked question during the long case viva. And the moment the examiner asks, the students first will start with TCDC, ESR, complete blood picture, hemoglobin, and all. So you have to remember that cataract surgery in 99% of the scenarios is done under local anesthesia, that is peribulbar block. Or sometimes these days, many surgeons are preferring to do it in topical anesthesia also. So you don't basically need all the routine blood investigations which you do for a general surgery workup. Okay, so among the blood investigations, there are three things which you have to do. That is, one is random blood sugar, then HIV, and HbSAg. Okay, random blood sugar, because you have to see that the blood sugar levels are within the normal limits. Otherwise, there is a higher chance of endophthalmitis in patients whose blood sugar levels are not controlled. That is the reason you have to do compulsorily RBS. HIV, HbSAg, of course, it is done for any kind of before putting blade on the body. These two viral markers are a must. Okay. Then another important thing what you have to do is checking up of blood pressure. Why blood pressure is important? Anybody? Anyone? Why is blood pressure checking important? Because this is again done under topical anesthesia only, or your peribulbar block. Yet blood pressure checking is important. Why? Anyone? Anyone can take this question, please. Why is checking of blood pressure important while doing a cataract surgery? Nobody knows the answer? Okay. So what you do is when you open the eye is under certain intraocular pressure, right? So the blood vessels, if they are under very high pressure, that is, if the blood pressure is very high, what happens is the moment you open the globe, there the blood pressure the blood vessels will burst in order to equalize the pressure. So there will be something called as expulsive hemorrhage, which is a very dreaded intraoperative complication. So to avoid that, you should always see that a person's blood pressure is under control before taking him up for cataract surgeries. Okay, for any other ocular surgery for that matter. So these were about the general investigations, but apart from that, the ocular investigations are what are very, very important. So these three ocular investigations are a must. One is intraocular pressure, which is again it's very important because, as I told you, when the eye is under normal pressure, say the normal pressure is around 15 to 20, okay. So once you give the block and you massage, the pressure will reduce to somewhat 10 millimeters of mercury or 12 millimeters of mercury. So that kind of an eyeball, when you open, nothing will happen. But if the pressure is, intraocular pressure is say 40, 50, and then you take the patient up for surgery and open, suddenly there is giving way of the blood vessels, and hence it again leads to this dreaded intraoperative complication called as expulsive hemorrhage. So that is the reason you have to control intraocular pressure also. Another very important investigation is your regurgitation test, and finally biometry for calculating the IOL power. We will see each of these in detail now. Okay, intraocular pressure can be measured by two different instruments, that is your tonometers, two different kinds of tonometers. One is applanation and one is indentation tonometer. Nowadays, indentation tonometer is outdated and is used only in camps because it is a small and handy instrument. You can take it along when you go for screening camps. So only for screening in the camps it is used. Otherwise, basically everybody is using now applanation tonometer only. So this is the picture on the left top here. The doctor, this is the applanation tonometer, which is mounted over a slit lamp. Okay, so the instrument consists of two prisms which are arranged in such a way that okay, sorry. Okay, look at the right side picture. There are two prisms. The instrument has got two prisms which are shown in the form of Myers. These are the Myers. Okay, so what we do is first you have to anesthetize the patient, topical anesthesia, and then just touch the applanation tonometer on the cornea. Actually, this is based on your physics principle where pressure is equal to force per unit area. So the instrument measures the amount of force that is required to applanate or flatten a given area of the cornea. So the given area of the cornea is 3.03 millimeters of central cornea. Okay, so how do you know that that much of cornea has been applanated? By looking at the Myers. So look at the look at the Myers in the top right picture. So when the inner circles of both the Myers coincide, it means that the instrument has applanated the central 3.03 millimeters of mercury. So sorry, central 3.03 millimeters of the cornea. So the amount of force that is required to applanate this gives the pressure. So the reading is there in the instrument. There is a scale which is there in the instrument and you read it. So for you, I don't think they will be asking explanation of the applanation tonometer. What they will ask is which instrument is used to measure the intraocular pressure. So there are two instruments. One is Goldman's applanation tonometer, which is the most commonly and gold standard instrument, and it gives most accurate readings. The other one is the Sheard's indentation tonometer. Okay, so next investigation is your regurgitation test. This you all know. What you have to do is you have to press with your index finger over the sac area, that is 1 millimeter medial to the medial canthus. So when you press, if you see regurgitation of any mucoid or mucopurulent substance from the puncti, it indicates the presence of an infection within the sac, within the canaliculi, or within the nasolacrimal duct. So, in the presence of any infection in the sac, you cannot operate on the eye. That is, you cannot perform any kind of intraocular operation, because if you open the eye in the presence of infection around the eye, you will be giving the organisms a path to enter into the eye, which will lead to a dreaded post operative complication, that is your endophthalmitis. So that's why your regurgitation test is a must. Then the third important investigation, ocular investigation, which you do is IOL power calculation. See, all of us do not have same refracting powers for the eye, isn't it? Some of us are myopes, some are hypermetropes, some are emetropes, some have astigmatism. So the intraocular lens what you are going to put is not going to be the same for all, because after the surgery, the post-operative result, you aim for an emetropia. That means if a patient was whether emetropic, hypermetropic, or myopic, after his surgery you aim for an emetropia. So you aim that after his cataract surgery he gets 6/6 vision. Okay, so that is the reason we individualize each person and calculate his or her SRK formula. So how do you calculate SRK formula? Which is represented as P is equal to A minus 0.9 K minus 2.5 L. Here, P stands for power of the intraocular lens, which you are going to calculate. A stands for A constant. What is the meaning of A constant? It is a constant for that particular make of the IOL. So A constant will be labeled over the IOL which you are going to use for the patient. So company to company, the A constant will change. Okay, and from PCI world to ACI world to iris fixated lens to scleral fixated lens. That's how the A constant changes. So A constant is a constant for that particular make of the lens. So it will be labeled over the box of the IOL which you are going to use. So you will look at that and then feed the A constant in the formula. Okay. Then what does K stands for? K stands for keratometry and L stands for axial length. These two we will see a little in detail. So what is the meaning of keratometry? Keratometry is nothing but the refracting power of the cornea or the corneal curvature. See, refracting power of the cornea is because of its curvature. So if you measure the curvature of the cornea, indirectly you are measuring the refractive power of the cornea. Okay. So this instrument which you are seeing on the right side is a Bausch and Lomb manual keratometer. You also have automated keratometers. Both are used for, basically a keratometer is used for measuring the curvature of the cornea. So you have on this instrument, see, sorry, this knob what you are seeing is this knob what you're seeing is the scale. So here again you will look into the look at the left picture where the doctor is where the patient is made to sit with his chin over the chin rest, and then his eye is viewed through the eyepiece, and the Myers are adjusted in such a way that they coincide with each other. So once they coincide, then you will get the reading. The reading is measured in terms of diopters and millimeters. So what we need in the formula is in terms of diopters. So there will be reading in terms of millimeters also. That means the curvature is 7.5 millimeters, like that. Okay. And at the same time, there will also be in diopters. Say normal dioptric power of the cornea ranges between 40 to 45. So it will be around 43, 44, whatever. It is individualized to each patient. So this is what we are calculating. Then the next one is, how do we calculate the axial length? The axial length is calculated by an instrument called as ultrasound A scan, or an optical instrument called as IOL master. Okay. So these are the two different, so you can do by ultrasonic methods or optical methods. Ultrasound methods, you use A scan biometry, and in optical methods you use IOL master. So I have given you, I have shown you here an ultrasound um, A scan machine on your right. This one, these are the probes. The probe is placed over the cornea, and then at the bottom you can see the waves. So that is how, and the reading comes on the machine. So this A scan machine also will have in it, it's a computerized machine. So the SRK formula is fed into the machine. So what you will do is use the probes. First anesthetize, topical anesthesia is put over the patient's cornea, then the machine is switched on. You place the probe on the front surface of the eye, and then the axial length is measured. So once you obtain that reading, see here on the monitor, it is written as 23.75 millimeters. So that is the axial length of that particular patient. So this, along with the keratometry readings, is entered into the instrument. Same instrument will, if you there is an option for calculating IOL power. So once you press that option, the formula is already fed to the computer. So it will ask for a constant, it will ask for the A constant, it will ask for the keratometry readings, and it will ask for the axial length readings. So once you feed all these three, the computer calculates the IOL power and gives it to you, say as 20.5, 21.5, 23.5. If it is a hypermetrop, then it will be more on the plus side. If it is a myope, then it will be lesser plus. Okay, because we don't want the patient to land up in we don't want a myope to land up in myopia again. So we are not standardizing the IOL, we are individualizing the case, and we are calculating his IOL power so that post operatively he will be an emetrope. So what you have to remember here is, for a standard patient, that is emetropic patient, the standard intraocular power is usually plus 20. Okay, plus 15 to plus 20 is the usual refracting power of the lens, isn't it? So usually we get around plus 19 or plus 20 IOL power. So if you take a myope, then it will be less than plus 20, and if you take a hypermetrope, it will be more than plus 20. So these are the points which you have to remember and note down for your practicals. Okay. Okay, so that was about preoperative investigations. So in preoperative investigations, you have to remember what are the investigations you're going to do. One is random blood sugar. Second thing, HIV, HBsAg, and then most important are the ocular investigations. And among the ocular investigations, what you are going to do is, one, calculate IOP using applanation tonometer or Sheard's tonometer. Then do the regurgitation test by pressing with your index finger over the lacrimal sac area and observe whether any mucopurulent substance or mucoid substance is coming out of the, or regurgitating through the punctum. If the regurgitation is positive, then you have to post the patient for DCT or DCR wait for 1 month, and then only take him up for cataract surgery. Okay. Then third investigation is your biometry. Biometry is nothing but calculating the intraocular power of the intraocular lens using some biological measures of the eye. So this is done using your SRK formula, in which you need to feed the A constant, which is uh, individualized for each lens make. Okay. Next, next thing is you have to calculate the keratometry. The keratometry is calculated using the keratometer. It is expressed in diopters in the SRK formula. This is very important. Keratometry readings are expressed in terms of diopters. The units are diopters. Okay. Then next is axial length. Axial length is calculated by A scan biometry. Okay. And when you feed all this, you get the intraocular power. Right. So then we move on to the next topic, that is, what is the anesthesia that is used for cataract surgery. This you all know that in 99.9% of the times we prefer local anesthesia or topical anesthesia. They will ask you which local anesthetic is used. You have to use 2% xylocaine. So the percentage of xylocaine is very, very important. 2% xylocaine is used along with 0.5% bupivacaine. Okay. You mix little adrenaline, 1 in 2 lakh dilution. You mix very minute quantity of say half ml for 30 ml of xylocaine. Okay. So that you do, and along with that you mix hyaluronidase. This helps in hyaluronidase and your xylocaine, I mean, sorry, your adrenaline. They are going to help in spread of the anesthesia. Basically, the anesthetic agents are xylocaine and bupivacaine. Bupivacaine is a long-acting anesthetic agent. So you mix half the quantity as bupivacaine and half the quantity as xylocaine. So basically, it is 2% xylocaine with 0.5% bupivacaine. You give around 5 to 7 cc's in case of peribulbar block, 3 cc's in case of retrobulbar block. So you can either give peribulbar block or retrobulbar block if you are going for a local infiltration. If you are using topical anesthesia, then you have to use 4% xylocaine drops. 4%. So this percentage is very important. For infiltration, you use 2% xylocaine. For topical anesthesia, you use 4% xylocaine. Okay. So basically, it is either topical anesthesia or your local anesthesia, local infiltration. Okay. Very rarely you go for general anesthesia. So which are the patients where you have to give general anesthesia while performing a cataract surgery? This is another favorite question of the examiners. So the conditions are pediatric cataracts. So in children, when you want to perform cataract surgery or any kind of surgery, you go for general anesthesia. One. Next is very uncooperative patients, like say they are totally deaf mute. They can't understand what you are going to instruct, and they get very scared at whatever you are going to do. So such kind of patients you may opt to do under general anesthesia. And another category of patient is severely mental retarded or mentally unstable patients. So these are the very special scenarios, but most commonly it is in pediatric cataract. Okay. Where we use general anesthesia. Now, which anesthesia is most preferred? Peribulbar block is most preferred when compared to retrobulbar block. Why? Because retrobulbar block will have certain complications. Let's just look at this picture. On the left side left side top, what I have shown is the peribulbar block. So here the needle goes into the peribulbar space. That means it is going in the space which is around the eye. But if you take the picture on the right, here the needle is going behind the globe into the retrobulbar space. So if you when you go behind the globe, there is a chance that you will damage the optic nerve. One, if your needle accidentally hits the optic nerve. One. Second thing is, the central retinal artery is present in the retrobulbar space 10 millimeters behind the globe. It is going to pierce into the substance of the optic nerve and run within the optic nerve, isn't it? So by the needle you use in retrobulbar block is very long, so the needle can by chance sometimes hit the central retinal artery. In that case, it will cause another complication called as retrobulbar hemorrhage. So these are the two important complications of retrobulbar block. One is accidental puncture of central retinal artery leading to retrobulbar hemorrhage. Second thing is damage to optic nerve. Okay, so this is another very important question which you will be asked, whether retrobulbar block is preferred or peribulbar block is preferred. The answer is peribulbar block. Why? Because in retrobulbar block, there are two important complications which can occur. That is, one is retrobulbar hemorrhage, and the second thing is damage to the optic nerve. So to avoid these two complications, we go for a peribulbar block. So where is the peribulbar block given, or how is the peribulbar block given? You look at the bottom picture. So at the junction of the medial two-thirds and lateral two-thirds, the the anesthetic agent is injected into the peribulbar space in the lower lid. You just by just pulling the lower lid. Okay. So this is how peribulbar block is given. Now, next thing is steps of small incision cataract surgery. So all of you know that your small incision cataract surgery is is any incision less than 7 millimeters in size is called as a small incision cataract surgery. This is actually manual small incision cataract surgery, because phacoemulsification is also a small incision cataract surgery because the incision there is very small. So in particular, SICS, it is generally termed as SICS, but it's actually manual small incision cataract surgery, where the what is the specialty is the incision. So this is a sutureless surgery. So at the end of the surgery, you need not apply sutures. Why? Because the incision you are going to make is like a tunnel. Okay? It is like a tunnel. What you are going to do is, see this, this is the cornea. So 1.5 or 2 millimeters away from the cornea, that is within the sclera, you take a 1/4 depth or 1/3 depth of incision, and then you take your blade up to the cornea and then go in the same plane 1 millimeter beyond the cornea. That means into the corneal stromal layers. Okay, you start from the sclera 1 millimeter away from the limbus or 2 millimeters away from the limbus. Go within the layers of the sclera. When you touch the cornea, go within the layers, stromal layers of the cornea, 1/3 depth. Okay. And then once you reach uh, 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters beyond the limbus, then you dip. Okay, so what you are actually doing is, it is a 3-walled incision. So once you remove your instruments and reform the anterior chamber, it is a self-sealing wound because it is not a single cut. Look at this picture. So the first thing what we do is, this is the limbus, the blue thing what you are seeing, the junction of conjunctiva, junction of cornea and sclera. Okay, so this is the limbus. So go 1 to 1.5 or 2 millimeters behind the limbus. Take your incision. The incision, some surgeons prefer to give a frown shaped incision. Some surgeons give a straight incision. Whatever you want, you can give. But the importance is the position of the incision. So you go 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters behind the limbus in the sclera. So, and then you take this instrument called as the crescent plate. This is the crescent plate, and then you make the tunnel. So once you make the tunnel, the tunnel is called as the sclerocorneal tunnel because you are making a tube or a tunnel within the depths of the sclera, and you are going up to 1 millimeter beyond the limbus into the corneal stromal layers, and then creating the tunnel. So then once you create the tunnel, you take this entry blade and enter into the anterior chamber. Okay, so the moment you enter into the anterior chamber, the anterior chamber will collapse because it is filled with the fluid, watery substance, that is aqueous humor. So that escapes. So to reform the anterior chamber, you put a viscoelastic substance. So once you put the viscoelastic substance, your anterior chamber will become deep. So then what you will do is you will try to open the anterior capsule of the lens by tearing it in a neat circular fashion. So that is called as capsulorhexis. So once you do capsulorhexis, then what you try to do here is you insert some fluid between the capsule and the lens and try to rotate the lens and prolapse it into the anterior chamber. So the lens is within the posterior chamber, isn't it? So it is covered by an anterior capsule and a posterior capsule. So what we are doing is we are making a hole in the anterior capsule. Okay, so and that anterior part of the anterior capsule is discarded. So what is remaining is a bag consisting of the rim of anterior capsule and the entire posterior capsule. So within this bag lies your nucleus of the lens and the cortical matter of the lens. The nucleus is the one which is very hard. Okay, so that is the most difficult to tackle. So what we are doing here is we are trying to bring the nucleus, put some fluid between the nucleus and the um, capsular bag, trying to rotate the nucleus and bring it to the anterior chamber. So once it is in the anterior chamber, what you will do is you use this instrument called as the wire vectis and deliver the nucleus intact in toto. This is the most important difference between phacoemulsification and small incision cataract surgery. So in small incision cataract surgery, what we are doing is prolapsing the entire nucleus into the anterior chamber and removing the nucleus. This is called as nucleus delivery. The entire nucleus is delivered through the incision. So once you do that, the cortical matter is aspirated. Cortical matter is like soft and cottony. So it is easily aspirated by your cannula. So the cortical matter is just aspirated. The nucleus is the one which is very, very hard and difficult. So once you remove that, the cortical matter can just be aspirated with your cannula, and then your IOL is inserted. Okay. So once you remove the cataract, there is a bag. The bag consisting of a rim of anterior capsule and the posterior capsule. So within this bag, we are replacing the lens with our artificial lens. And the power we have already calculated. Whatever power is suitable for that particular patient, that particular IOL you will implant within the bag. Okay, so that marks the end of the surgery. So once you keep the this one your IOL within the bag, you have to remember to remove the excess of the not excess, remove the entire viscoelastic substance which you have injected while operating the surgery. You inject a viscoelastic substance in order to maintain the anterior chamber and to coat the corneal endothelium so that your instruments do not touch and damage the corneal endothelium. So these are the two important. This is another favorite question of the examiners. What is the function of viscoelastic substance? So the viscoelastic substance is used, one, to maintain the anterior chamber depth, two, in order to protect the corneal endothelium because it coats the corneal endothelium and it protects from being damaged by your rubbing of the nucleus or touching of any of the instruments. Okay, so that is about it. So in the end, what you have to do is you have to remove the viscoelastic substance whatever you have put. Otherwise, what will happen? This viscoelastic substance is viscous. It will go and block the trabecular meshwork. So the next day, the patient will land up in severe secondary glaucoma. So that is the reason you have to clean the entire anterior and posterior chamber of the of all the viscoelastic substance you have used. Okay, so these are the important questions which they are commonly you will be facing in the viva exam. So now we will look at what are the differences between small incision cataract surgery and phacoemulsification. So you have to remember that both procedures are sutureless. You don't have to put suture because in both these procedures, what you will be doing is you will be doing a tunnel incision. Okay, tunnel incision is always a self-sealing one because it is a three-step incision. Okay, so but what is the difference is the size, incision size. So in small incision cataract surgery, that is manual small incision cataract surgery, the size of the incision is 6 to 7 millimeters, whereas in phaco it is 3 to 3.5 millimeters in size. So naturally, less size of the incision, lesser is the postoperative astigmatism. So that is the greatest advantage of phacoemulsification. Because the incision size is so small as 2.5 to 3.5 millimeters, the amount of postoperative astigmatism you are going to get is very, very less. Actually, what happens is whenever you try to give any incision, so it heals, isn't it? It heals by scarring. So when it heals by scarring, that particular meridian becomes flattened. Okay, so that is the reason you land up in some amount of postoperative astigmatism in any kind of intraocular surgery. So the amount of postoperative astigmatism is directly proportional to the length of the incision. So if you have made a longer incision, you get more amount of postoperative astigmatism. If you have made a smaller incision, you get less amount of postoperative astigmatism. Okay. Similarly, if you try to suture the wound, you are going to get more astigmatism because while suturing you will be pulling, isn't it? When you are pulling, you are making the cornea more flat in that particular meridian. So that's why all these sutureless surgeries, be it SICS or phaco, they have a lesser incidence of postoperative astigmatism. But when you compare SICS with phaco, definitely phaco has a greater advantage because it causes very little post-operative astigmatism when compared to SICS, because of the incision size. The incision size is very, very less. Okay, so that is one most important difference between the two. Another very important difference is what I was just now explaining. In case of small incision cataract surgery, the whole nucleus is prolapsed into the anterior chamber, and then it is delivered manually in toto. Okay, but in case of phacoemulsification, what you're doing is you are not prolapsing the nucleus into the anterior chamber at all. Within the bag only, you're trying to manipulate using the ultrasound probe. Okay, so the phaco machine has a source of ultrasound energy, and using this ultrasound energy, the entire nucleus is emulsified, that means liquefied and sucked into the instrument. Okay, and that's how your nucleus is tackled. So that's the another very, very important difference between phaco and your small incision. In case of small incision, you will deliver the nucleus in toto by prolapsing it into the AC first, and then outside of the eye using the wire vectors. Whereas in case of phaco, you emulsify the nucleus and suck the entire nucleus by the by using the ultrasound probe. Okay, so you are not bringing the nucleus into the anterior chamber at all in case of phacoemulsification. Okay, then the third difference is the IOL you are going to use. In case of phacoemulsification, because you are making a um, very small incision, how will you introduce the lens? Your intraocular lens optic size has to be a minimum of 6 millimeters, isn't it? Otherwise, there won't be enough area for the refraction to occur, isn't it? So a minimum diameter of the intraocular lens optic is 5.5 to 6 millimeters, isn't it? So how will you put a 6 millimeter lens in a 3 from a 3 millimeter incision? For that, you have to use foldable intraocular lens. So this is another very important difference between SICS and phaco. In case of phaco, you have to use foldable IOLs only. Whereas in case of small incision cataract surgery, you can use the rigid PMMA lens or foldable IOLs. Okay. So for the same reason, your small incision or manual small incision cataract surgery is very cost effective because you don't need foldable IOLs, you don't need a phaco machine, which is expensive, isn't it? So the basic surgical instruments are the ones which are required for SICS. So it is very cost effective and it is very useful when you are trying to do for big masses. That means when you are trying to do in camps, when you are trying to do lot of patients, especially in developing countries like ours, where the population is very high and the number of blind people due to cataract is very high, and you want to give everyone good vision without costing much. This is a very, very suitable, cost effective surgery. And another advantage of small incision cataract surgery is it is an easy procedure to learn. Okay, whereas phaco, because you have to learn to coordinate your eye, your hand, your leg, everything, it has got a long learning curve. So SICS is an easy procedure to learn, whereas phaco is a slightly difficult procedure, so it has a longer learning curve. Okay, so this is the only disadvantage of phaco. It is costly and it is has a longer learning curve. The same is advantage for SICS. It has a smaller learning curve and it is cheaper to perform. Okay, so but otherwise, phacoemulsification surgery is superior when compared to SICS surgery because the length of the incision is very less. It is around 2.5 to 3 millimeters. Because of this, the postoperative astigmatism is very, very less. Next, another important question which is asked in long case viva is how do you treat that is what is the post operative management of after a cataract surgery. So after this is the commonest question which is asked to students, and everybody will answer analgesics and antibiotics. See, in ophthalmology, whatever medications you use should be in the form of eye drops. Systemic medications work less when compared to topical medications. Why? Because of the presence of a blood aqueous barrier. So if you use local drops, it is much easier to be absorbed from the conjunctival surface. That's why in every post-operative case, you have to use topical medication only. Then, what are the medications you have to use? You have to use steroid drops and antibiotic drops. Why antibiotic drops? In order to prevent infection. In any surgery, as a post-operative medication, you will give antibiotics in order to prevent infection. Okay, so here we can use moxifloxacin eye drops or ciprofloxacin eye drops 6 times daily for a period of 2 weeks. Then the most important medication here is steroid eye drops in the form of dexamethasone or prednisolone acetate. This is given in a tapering dose. That means on the first and the second day, you give once in every 2 hours. Then from third day onwards, up to the end of the first week, you give around 6 to 8 times daily. After that, you reduce. You reduce by 4 times daily for 1 week, and then make it 3 times daily for the next week. Then make it 2 times daily for the next week. Like that, you taper over a period of 6 weeks. Okay, that means 1.5 month treatment for cataract post-operative cases. So 1.5 months, that is 6 weeks, you have to give steroid drops on a tapering basis. That is very, very important. Next is antibiotic drops for the first 2 weeks. You should never taper antibiotics. This is very important because they lose their potency if you taper. Antibiotics always have to be given full dose. That means if you have started 6 times daily, continue for 6 times daily for the entire period of 2 weeks. Okay. Then another adjuvant drug which you may use, some of the surgeons prefer to use, is tropicamide. Tropicamide is a weak cycloplegic agent. So in every case of intraocular surgery, there will be some amount of intraocular inflammation because you are meddling with the iris, isn't it? So you are irritating the iris, so there will be definitely some kind of iritis or iridocyclitis. So in order to reduce that inflammation, we are giving steroids, and for the same reason, there might be there might be spasm, isn't it? Ciliary spasm, because of which there will be pain. So to relieve that, we use 1 drop of tropicamide in the night for the first 2 or 3 days. Okay, this is another very important question that is asked. Which cycloplegic agent do you prefer in a post-operative case? Do you want to give atropine, cyclopentolate, or tropicamide? You have to give tropicamide only because it is short acting. If you give atropine or homatropine to a patient, post-operative patient, what will happen? he will go into cycloplegia. Atropin's action will stay for 15 days. Hometropin for 3 to 4 days. Okay, so the patient will be totally blind because blind in the sense there will be total cycloplegia. So the near vision is totally lost, isn't it? So we cannot make the patient totally cycloplegic. So that is the reason we use a weak cycloplegic agent. And another important reason why we use tropicamide is in the post-operative case, we do not want the pupil to be fully dilated or fully constricted. We want the pupil to be acting in order to prevent Synec formation. So that is the reason we use tropicamide if at all you have to use. Many surgeons don't even prefer to use any cycloplegics in the postoperative period, but some people do prefer. And when you use a cycloplegic agent, it has to be only tropicamide. So the question is, what is the cycloplegic agent of choice in postoperative cases? The answer is tropicamide because it is the shortest acting. Okay, so that is another important question which is going to be asked by the examiners. Okay, so before we end the class, I'll show you this small video. This is a case of manual small incision cataract surgery. See, first we begin with peritomy, that is cutting up of the conjunctiva at the 12 o'clock position. Okay. And once you cut, there will be small bleeders, the episcleral vessels. These are cauterized, and then an incision is made 1.5 millimeters behind the limbus, and then the tunnel. Okay, look at the surgeon. He is making the tunnel within the layers of the cornea. He is not enter the anterior chamber. This is within the corneal stroma. Okay, now he is entering. Once he enters, he will inject viscoelastic substance to reform the anterior chamber. And then he is going ahead with opening of the incision. Now he is trying to do a capsulorhexis. He is using a rhexis forceps. Whatever he is removed is the anterior capsule. After that, he is injecting fluid between the capsule and the nucleus. He is trying to prolapse the nucleus into the anterior chamber. Once it is in the anterior chamber, he is introducing the vectis and delivering. See, the whole nucleus is delivered in toto. Next, there will be cortical matter. All that fluffy matter you are seeing is the cortical matter, which is absorbed using the Simcoe two-way cannula, irrigation aspiration cannula. See, if you can observe, there are two ports. One is for irrigation and one is for aspiration. If you only keep aspirating, then the AC will collapse, isn't it? So at the same time, there will be irrigation also. Now he is injecting the viscoelastic substance and then implanting the intraocular lens. Then he is removing all the viscoelastic substance. Once the entire anterior chamber is cleared of the visco, they will reform the anterior chamber using the Ringer lactate. And now he is cauterizing the conjunctiva and closing the. You saw that they have not applied sutures, isn't it? So that was about the small incision cataract surgery. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me. Otherwise, we will end the class. Okay, so please read about the preoperative investigations, the differences between phaco and small incision, which type of anesthesia is preferred, what are the complications faced because of your retrobulbar anesthesia, what is the post-operative treatment that is given for after cataract surgery. So these are the important questions regarding the cataract surgery which you will be asked in the this one long case viva. Okay, so we will end the class now.